Okay, I think everyone's joined for right now. Hello and welcome everyone to the Council of State Government's second webinar in our series in recognition of the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disability Act. I am Christina Gordley and a Senior Policy Analyst at the Council of State Governments. On July 26, 1990, President George H.W. Bush signed the Americans with Disabilities Act into law, an act modeled after the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. The ADA represented the most comprehensive disability rights legislation in history. This past July 26 marked the 30th anniversary of this landmark legislation. Over the past 30 years, the ADA and comparable state non-discrimination legislation have resulted in notable improvements to employment opportunities, public accommodations, transportation, independent and community living, and employment for individuals with disabilities, amongst other changes. To celebrate this landmark legislation, the Council of State Governments, in partnership with the U.S. Department of Labor's Office of Disability Employment, is hosting a 6-part webinar series. Along with its policymakers, industry experts, and leaders in the field, we will discuss a variety of policies and programs that can enhance disability employment policy in your state. States have played a critical role in these improvements, but still have a long way to go to achieve full equity for individuals with disabilities. Today's webinar, we will cover how states can act as model employers of individuals with disabilities. I would like to thank our moderator, Nadia Mossberg, with Office of Disability Employment Policy, and our incredible panel of speakers, the Office of Disability Employment Policy, the State Exchange on Employment and Disability, and our partners at the Cornell Yang Tan Institute on Employment and Disability in development of this web series. Before we get started, I'd like to draw your attention to a few housekeeping items. Closed captioning is available, and there's a link available in the chat. Zoom, you can use the usual keyboard shortcuts to access functionality. To reduce noise during our conversation, all participants will be muted during the webinar. This webinar will be available to view on our website with the transcript, and slides are also available in an accessible PDF format on our website, seed.csg.org, under the ADA 30 tab. If you have any questions for our panelists, and we encourage those, please submit them through this chat feature in the bottom menu. If you have any technical difficulties, or if you have a question about Zoom, please use the chat feature to type a question, and our CSG staff will get back to you as soon as possible. And without further delay, let's get started with our program. Our moderator today is Nadia Mossberg. Nadia is a Senior Policy Advisor for the U.S. Department of Labor's Office of Disability Employment Policy, or we call it ODEP. Nadia is a leader in the disability employment policy world, bringing over 20 years of experience in health and human service policy and program development and implementation. She has been an expert in the field of inclusion and instrumental in policy development within states and organizations for individuals with disabilities. She leads ODEP's work with the State Exchange on Employment and Disability, we call SEED, and has worked with countless state and local leaders and provided subject matter expertise and direct policy assistance to help inform their efforts. We are incredibly honored to have her here today. Joining us on our panel of experts is Secretary Carol Beatty. Carol Beatty grew up with a physical disability before the Americans with Disabilities Act became law in 1990. In her 4 years working for Governor Larry Hogan, Carol Beatty has built partnerships with other state agencies and grassroots groups to address the challenges facing more than 650,000 children and adults in the states with disabilities. And she currently serves as the Secretary of Maryland Department of Disabilities. She's currently a member of the Governor's Executive Council and within the Cabinet, the Children's Cabinet, and the Maryland School Safety Subcabinet. She chairs the Maryland's Interagency Council on Homelessness and is a member of the Maryland 529 Plan Board, which also houses the Maryland ABLE Plan. Maryland is currently the only state to establish a cabinet-level Department of Disabilities, and that reports directly to the Governor for interdepartmental coordination. The department evaluates programs and services, coordinates to serve people with disabilities, and provides information and referrals. Senator John Hoffman is joining us today. And Senator Hoffman is a Minnesota State Senator since 2012 and serves as the chair of the Governor's Developmental Disabilities Council. He also serves on the Legislative Committee for Aging and Long-Term Care, Rural Development and Housing Policy, Energy and Utilities, and Human Services Reform Committees. Senator Hoffman is a long-standing leader and champion for disability policy, holding several key positions in addition to his role as a state senator. Senator Hoffman has been appointed to multiple state and national boards and commissions, including an appointment by the U.S. Secretary of Education in 2001 to the Federal Interagency Coordinating Council. In 2005, Senator Hoffman was elected and served as vice chair of the Anoka-Hennepin School Board, which is the largest school district in the state of Minnesota. And in his current role, the senator continues to promote employment success for people with disability through policy action. He has sponsored numerous bills and championed legislation to empower individuals with disabilities, including most recently during a special session of the Minnesota State Legislature, for example, that was regarding the disability service providers in response to COVID-19. Senator Hoffman served as a member of the National Task Force on Workforce Development for People with Disabilities, which resulted in the Work Matters report. We appreciate his longtime involvement and support. Representative Dan Miller joins us, and he has served with the House of Representatives in Pennsylvania since 2013 and is recognized leader in Pennsylvania on disability policy and employment of people with disabilities. He currently serves on the Education Committee, the Judiciary Committee, the Labor and Industry Committee, and Human Services Committee. He is the co-chair of the Subcommittee on Special Education and the Blue-Green Alliance Caucus, and is also a member of the Autism and Intellectual Disabilities, Climate, Early Childhood Education, Firefighters, EMS, LGBTQ, Equality, Hope, and Steel caucuses. In 2019, he was elected chair of the Allegheny County House Democratic Delegation. Representative Miller hosts an annual disability summit each year, and this year his event highlighted the ADA 30 and drew thousands of Pennsylvanians to Pittsburgh. This event also featured a panel of 30 bipartisan legislators who heard testimony about disability employment and mental health policy. And we are honored to have you all join us today and look forward to learning more about your programs in your states. And let's get started, and I'd like to hand it over to Nadia.
Thanks, Christina. Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. And thank you to everyone at CSG for hosting this impressive ADA 30 webinar series. A few weeks ago, we celebrated the 30th anniversary of the passage of the landmark Americans with Disabilities Act, President George H.W. Bush signed into law on July 26, 1990. The ADA affirms that all Americans, including those of us with disabilities, have the right to gain skills and put them to work for the benefit of our families, communities, and our nation. By prohibiting discrimination on the basis of disability and employment services, as well as support, the ADA increases access and opportunity. 30 years later, the ADA and the access and opportunity it safeguards means more. It extends beyond the physical to include communications, services, and programs. And it asserts that people with all types of disabilities, apparent, non-apparent, physical, sensory, intellectual, and mental health related, have the right to contribute to and enjoy the benefits of work in their communities. I remember clearly the difference the passage of the ADA made for me as a college freshman. I gained access to opportunity to pursue my current career. Prior to that, I'd been carried on the school bus, and when I applied to the college of my choice, I was told to look elsewhere because the campus was not equipped to meet my needs. At the Office of Disability Employment Policy and the U.S. Department of Labor, we want all people with disabilities to have equal access and opportunity to feel empowered to discover all that they can do. That's the spirit behind the ADA, and we're committed to delivering on it by developing and influencing policy and practices that increase employment opportunities for people with disabilities. However, as all of you know, workforce issues are regional in nature, so collaboration with state policymakers are critical to our success. We know what works in one state might not work in another, but we also know that what works in one state might also work in another. That's the thinking behind the State Exchange on Employment and Disability, or SEED, initiative, which we could not have launched without the support of CSG. In fact, CSG was one of SEED's initial partners and is the driving force behind its success. The goal of SEED is to help state policymakers adopt and implement inclusive workforce policies that improve opportunities for all individuals to work and succeed. It's important to note, through SEED, we're not seeking to influence state legislation. We're here to help. And one of SEED's most notable accomplishments is the National Task Force that resulted in a groundbreaking report titled Work Matters, a framework for states on workforce development for people with disabilities. This framework and the work in the states that has resulted from it would not have been accomplished without the leadership of CSG and the National Conference of State Legislators. What's unique about Work Matters framework is that it so clearly illustrates that increasing access and opportunity for people with disabilities in the workplace is about more than employment and training services. It's about all the pieces that support employment: transportation, healthcare, housing. It's also about ensuring that we understand the changing nature of the workplace and the workforce, and how state policy can facilitate workforce inclusion. Think about it. Just as today's workplace is not at all what we envisioned even 30 years ago, tomorrow's workplaces will be very different than today. The pandemic has, in many ways, given us a view of the future of the workforce, even if it's sooner than we might have liked. Issues such as telework, accessible technology, and the need to ensure people who acquire disabilities due to illness, injury, or the aging process can remain in the workforce are paramount. So looking ahead to the next 30 years and beyond, we need to ensure that state policy is inclusive, encourages innovation, and meets future workforce needs. So what's the first step we should take? Well, as states, you can lead by example, ensuring that state agencies become model employers. As noted on this slide, and also detailed in the Work Matters Policy Framework, which Christina mentioned, and I mentioned earlier, there are numerous policy options for states to consider. For example, first, adopting formal mechanisms such as executive orders and legislation or legislation committing states to be model employers. For example, Washington Governor Jay Inslee issued an executive order directing the state's Office of Financial Management to convene a task force to assist state agencies with recruitment and retention of persons with disabilities. 2, creating infrastructures to maximize the likelihood that employment-related and other issues affecting people with disabilities are addressed by government agencies at the earliest stages of policy development, design, implementation, and evaluation. States have used a variety of strategies to achieve this end, including cabinet-level positions, interagency working groups, and advisory committees. 3, adopting comprehensive government-wide strategic plans that include reporting to leadership on a regular basis. For example, the Massachusetts Strategic Plan is entirely devoted to implementing state as a model employer policy. Elements of the plan include increased recruitment efforts, expanded state agency internship opportunities, streamlined reasonable accommodation processes, use of universal design principles, and disability awareness training for state personnel. 4, extending diversity and inclusion initiatives. For example, affirmative action applicable to state agencies and departments. These efforts may include the adoption of hiring goals and preferences, development of employee self-identification policies, and the implementation of annual reporting mechanisms, and surveys. Last year, Governor Parsons of Missouri issued Executive Order 1916, directing the state to eliminate the disparity in the percentage of individuals with disabilities of working age in the population and the percentage of employees with disabilities in the state workforce, and set annual goals for continuing to increase the percentage of individuals with disabilities in the state workforce. 5, increasing the accessibility of application processes for people with disabilities by implementing fast track hiring systems. For example, state policymakers may want to consider special appointment lists for non-competitive positions, institutionalizing hiring preferences, trial work periods, and paid internships, conducting mandatory interviews, and making modifications to civil service exams to accommodate disabilities, as well as offering expedited certification processes. 6, adopting centralized accommodation, funding, and or expertise, telework and stay at work, return to work policies and processes. For example, by utilizing a centralized accommodation fund to pay for requests, states can ease the administrative and financial pressure on agency hiring personnel concerned about the impact of accommodations on agency budgets. State policies regarding telework simply include telework as a form of reasonable accommodation. And states can also intervene through early stay at work and return to work programs for their own employees through the administration of health insurance, disability insurance, and other benefits such as employee assistance programs. 7, elevating accessibility as a primary consideration in the design, development, and procurement of information and communication technology systems, including websites, online systems, and mobile apps. For example, in October 2017, California enacted Assembly Bill number 434, requiring state agencies to make their respective sites accessible by July 1st, 2019, to allow individuals relying on the use of assistive technology such as screen readers or voice recognition software and others to access and consume digital content. And 8, currently reasonable accommodations policy under Title I of the ADA and most state anti-discrimination laws do not require employers to provide personal aids and devices, including personal assistance services or PAS. PAS includes assistance with performing activities of daily living that an individual would typically perform if he or she did not have a significant disability and that is otherwise not required as a reasonable accommodation, including, for example, assistance with removing and putting on clothing, eating, and using the restroom. Recent provisions in the federal government now require the implementation of PAS policies. Several states are considering the adoption of similar PAS policies for state agencies. For example, here in the state of Florida, we have a policy that implemented the James Patrick Memorial Incentive Program. I personally utilize this program, which allows me to work and be reimbursed for PAS expenses. Prior to this, I was contributing close to 40% of my salary for these supports so that I could be in the workforce. And 9, while states may have robust policies and procedures to attract and retain employees with disabilities, it is important to offer training and direct training to direct supervisors and other employees regarding these policies to maximize implementation, such as reasonable accommodation procedures and disability etiquette. I'm excited to be moderating today's panel with my esteemed colleagues from Maryland, Minnesota, and Pennsylvania, all of whom will be sharing details about some of the policy options and strategies that their states have implemented to advance STEM policies. I want to reiterate that SEED is available to support all of you, all of your efforts in creating inclusive policies. We are happy to provide an analysis of your current policies along with options for your consideration, as well as examples of successful state implementation. Please visit dol.gov/ODEP, ODEP, and click on the State Policy tab for more information about SEED and how to contact us. But please also feel free to message me in the chat. Before we turn things over to our panelists, we're going to take a quick break in the action to engage all of you, our viewers, in a poll question. Please take a moment to answer the following question presented on your screen. What strategy do you think would be most effective in implementing same policies and programs in your state? The first option is formal mechanisms. Second option is infrastructure. Third option, strategic plan. Fourth option, diversity and inclusion. Fifth option, other. Sixth option, I don't know. And just to repeat that question, what strategy do you think would be most effective in implementing same policies and programs in your state? First option, formal mechanisms, including executive orders or legislation. Second option, infrastructures. Third option, strategic plans. Fourth option, diversity and inclusion initiatives. Fifth option, other. Sixth option, don't know. I'll give all of you a minute to answer the question. And if you have any problems accessing the poll or need assistance, please feel free to message us in the chat. We're happy to help. And it looks like the majority of our audience believe that formal mechanisms such as executive orders or legislation would be the most effective in implementing same policies in your state. Thank you so much. And now let's turn things over to our panelists. Let's start with you, Secretary Beatty. Secretary Beatty, can you tell us more about Maryland's STEM policies, given the focus that Maryland has had and its unique position of having the only cabinet level agency on disabilities? What steps can be taken to align state agencies and successfully integrate employment of people with disabilities in state government?
Yes, so hello, Nadia. I want to thank Nadia, Christina, and Dina for pulling this webinar together. And I am really honored to be joining Senator Hoffman and Representative Miller to explore this very important issue and to recognize the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. So Nadia mentioned that Maryland is the only state that has a cabinet level position that really is dedicated, and a department that is dedicated to cross disability issues, both policy development and also sort of bringing best practices to the attention of other state agencies. It was created in 2004 by then Governor Ehrlich, and it is informed by a Maryland Commission on Disabilities and also an interagency disability board. Somewhat unique, I think, is that in the statute that created our department, it requires that either the secretary or the deputy secretary have a disability, which I always think lends credence and validity to the department and creates a kind of a trust between the community and state government. We are the designated state agency for our state technology assistance program for the DD Council, and we are working towards that. We want to be the state agent, the state entity for the Centers for Independent Living, and there's a movement. There's a support by both the legislature, the centers themselves, of course, and the state government. So I think we'll be moving in that direction in the next year or two. We also have recently moved the state's telecommunications access program under the department. So we are now responsible for Maryland Relay Services and the Accessible Telecommunications Program. As it relates to workforce issues and increasing opportunities for employment, we work with the usual suspects. Our vocational rehabilitation program, which is known as the Division of Rehab Services, or DOORS. That is located within the Maryland State Department of Education, and we work very closely with early intervention and special education. We also work with labor, commerce, the Maryland Higher Education Commission, health, which oversees behavioral health administration, and also the Developmental Disabilities Administration, juvenile services, and the Department of Human Services. But, I know that all of you know that who are on this webinar know that the disability community represents a very broad range of individuals and the state and local services that they need and want access to. So as we're talking about employment today, in the fall, we invited and brought together our Secretary of Agriculture, Joe Bartenfelder, to Red Wiggler Farm, which is in Montgomery County, close to DC. And Red Wiggler is a working farm that trains people with significant intellectual disabilities in the agricultural field and prepares them for work. And we thought, what a better opportunity than bringing agriculture together with agriculture and asking the secretary to consider some ways to support this program, and also to be aware that people with intellectual disabilities, just like everybody else, want to farm, garden, be in that industry sector. Some recent efforts that we've been working on is developing a cross-agency linkage tool to track and improve linkages for students that are leaving high school and going into adult services. We also commissioned a study to ascertain gaps in funding for employment training and support, and to make recommendations for priorities for current and future funding strategies. We are in the process of completing phasing out of our sub-minimum wage ability, and that will be done this fall by 2020. We've also been researching potential strategies for individuals with autism who may not be eligible for services through the Developmental Disabilities Administration or the Behavioral Health Administration, or even DOORS, because we do have a wait list for DOORS services. So that's a little bit about our department. Now, as it relates to the state as a model employer, so I always like to start off that piece of the discussion, and I know other folks will address this. It's been years where states have and local governments have not been hiring as many people. I know this is not unusual or not unique to Maryland. But obviously during this pandemic, we just looked at the recent numbers. They're quite shocking. Our unemployment rate is 10.3% and 14.3% for people with disabilities. Government employment is 1.1 million below its February level. And as I'm sure in most states, Maryland is currently experiencing a hiring and spending freeze in response to the extreme economic downturn caused by the pandemic. That being said, we always need to be looking at initiatives to promote increasing employment for people with disabilities, and making sure that we're looking at the broader approach to including public and private sector opportunities for people with disabilities. As we head into the recovery mode with employment, the need to partner with state and local and private sectors will be even more critical to make sure that people with disabilities have equal access to jobs. This means paying close attention to training and retraining opportunities, the development of new industry sectors, and vigilance concerning accommodations and adaptations like teleworking that are extremely important for people with disabilities. So I've been asked to kind of touch on Maryland's telework options. We have implemented telework programs for all state employees. In fact, we had a state law established in 2013, which set a goal for 15% of state employees to telework. So this has been pretty inherent in state government at this point. Then came Friday, March 13th, 2020, when state government sent thousands of state employees home to do their jobs. And so now we are teleworking as much as we can, and this is allowing employers, the state, for example, to discover, but also to verify that workers are as productive out of the office while keeping people safe and stopping the spread of this disease. While the economy presents several challenges to employment for people with disabilities, there are silver linings. And so teleworking, I think, is one of them, and helps eliminate things like transportation, which is a kind of a barrier that has a disproportionate negative impact on employees with disabilities. I'd like to briefly also touch on 3 Maryland state government initiatives that were in effect before the pandemic, and I anticipate to continue to be in effect as we kind of navigate through these troubled times and get back to normal. One is the Quest internship program, and that offers voluntary unpaid internships in state government agencies to voc rehab clients. The intern may receive funding for any expenses that is incurred over and above usual living expenses, such as transportation, uniforms, shoes, those kinds of things. It's typically a 3-month assignment, but that has been extended. And positions are full-time and part-time, so they can be adapted to the person's need. State agencies which have had interns in the past include the Motor Vehicle Administration, Labor, the Department of Budget and Management, voc rehab, our department, the Department of Aging, and the Department of Veterans Affairs, and that's just to name a few. The interns receive valuable training and experience while enhancing their skills. Many go on to be hired in the public and private sector. So in the past 2 years, we've had 81 interns, and 8 of them have been hired into permanent or contractual positions in the government, in state government. And then we have the special options eligible list, which allows people with disabilities to be placed on a certified eligible list without having to compete in a selection test. And applicants for this must be certified by the Division of Rehab Services or provide documentation that is accepted by DOORS for certification. So that might be SSDI or SSI documentation, ticket to work, or eligibility for federal Schedule A hiring authority. The applicant's file is included for any job within the classifications that they meet the qualifications for. And the DOORS certification will then be uploaded with each online application. You know, this is not a well-used program or option in our state, And we have called for an interagency review of this program and its challenges and way to improve it. Of course, this was pre-COVID, so I'm hoping we can get back to this and to take a closer look at this in the near future. Since 2016, 376 people have been placed on the special options eligible list, and 12 people have been hired. And then the last initiative I wanted to talk about was our Disability Preference Points Program. This is where a person having a disability as defined by the ADA checks a question in the disability section of the state application when applying for employment. 5 additional points will be added to the final score on the selection tests when applying for positions with state government. And as a result of the hiring preference, 117 people who checked that they have a disability and have received the 5 additional points were hired by state agencies from January through November of 2019. The difference between these 2 programs is that the special options eligible program puts an eligible person on a list for a particular class of jobs, such as, say, administrative clerk. It puts the person on the list for any job that fits that criteria and statewide location that the person specifies. The preference points system adds 5 points to a candidate's application for a specific position. And that's why I think the numbers are different. One is very generic, the other is very specific to a job, and most people are hired through a specific posting. And Nadia, I think I'll leave it at that and allow the other panelists to present.
Sorry, there's someone at the door and my service dog thinks he needs to protect me. Representative Miller, Secretary Bader talked about telework and some of the things that Maryland is doing, but we would love to hear some of the work that you're doing in Pennsylvania. I know that you've hosted an annual disability summit aimed at increasing and providing resources. You've also introduced numerous bills to advance disability employment in Pennsylvania. Can you share some details about those policies, as well as what's motivated you to be such a champion for disability policy?
Sure, and thank you, Nadia. I very much appreciate you doing a great job, and your dog. I'm glad we hear he's okay. So
Yes,
that's good too. And I appreciate the CSG for bringing us all together to talk. And that's very, very much a great panel as always too. Pennsylvania, we've had some. I thought the good secretary kind of hit on a variety of points. And the way I've kind of looked at legislation is you kind of sort of have 3 tiers of how you can be helpful. We've done in Pennsylvania, we've kind of checked the first box, which is we've done our employment first legislation as far as setting some goals, and I think that's important for states to have and for people to have a plan on what to do going forward. The second one is sort of like how we kind of can integrate, take that goal and make it happen. And with the help of SEED, which is a tremendous partner, tremendous resource for people, and for those who haven't contacted SEED or look to work with them, I strongly urge, if you have an interest in this field, for you to do so. And SEED and CSG are fantastic partners. We created a bill that I think would deal with several aspects of what the good secretary talked about, as far as how can you get people actually in to those opportunities to allow them to succeed. And there are some differences. We've seen a range of states try a couple different ways to do that. Challenges for temporary positions, internships, permanent positions. Those types of steps are all part of I think a smart plan that kind of allows for flexibility and for opportunity for more people to be involved. And then I kind of also like the third step in a sense, which is, sort of like what I think the good secretary embodies, which is this understanding that whether we're talking employment, which is obviously the topic for today, but in every aspect, how great is it to have that sort of embedded in your government, a position like this secretary's, to be sure that hopefully in everything the state does, that the lives and opportunities of their citizens with disabilities are included in the planning and in the execution from top to bottom. So I do think that there are steps for most states, I think, to try and navigate through, and for legislators like myself, a good senator, I'm sure, to help play a part in it. In Pennsylvania, I said we're taking some steps forward. For those who haven't seen perhaps a middle approach, I have a bill, House Bill 1548. If you go on to Pennsylvania's site, you can pull it up. It is Accepted Service Hiring and Promotion Authority. The official purpose of it is to establish an accepted service hiring and promotion authority to more effectively and efficiently hire and promote adults whose physical or mental impairments impact their ability to participate in competitive hiring and promotion in Pennsylvania, right? So it's a mouthful, but if you take a look at it there, it will take you step by step through talking about and trying to do here in Pennsylvania. And so California's early work or with it, that you have to tailor towards your state. I think I'm all right there. That you have to tailor towards your individual state. But what you would see is there is a good model for you to work off of. And Nadia, do you still hear me? Okay.
Yes, I do.
All right. A little notice about my connection, but anyhow, so if you take a look at these things, it can help speed up. There's no need to reinvent the wheel in some of these regards. So again, I would urge you to take a look if you have an interest. And speaking of that, before I kind of get to your final point with it, I also want to encourage legislators and staff to which this is not their typical cup of tea, that they have a lot to learn. Believe me, I love being included in a panel here amongst experts, but I'm not one. So all I try to do is listen and work hard and try to improve things. I never mind telling people when I don't know, every aspect of something. So there is a need. The biggest thing about this thing for elected officials is just the need that needs to be addressed. So yes, it may be challenging for those who perhaps don't have a loved one with a diagnosis, who don't have a diagnosis themselves, who maybe haven't been too involved, but recognize the importance of maybe a year like now, the 30th anniversary of the ADA. I would encourage you to not wait for an invitation, and don't think because you didn't study it in school or something that you can't be helpful. So there are tools, there are resources. We need it across the country in every state. So I very much would encourage you to step forward, and you have a great team to rely on for help in doing so. Look, for me with it, I think most people, most people come into elected office with an idea that they're here to help people, and I think that's a common, it's fantastic. Hopefully that's what we all do. By the same token, we also like to maybe focus on some things that perhaps we have not fulfilled. Or kind of help our country get to the fullness of its goals. To me, the ADA, of course, as we celebrate its 30 years, is fantastic. And what a great piece of civil rights legislation for us to celebrate and to be proud of. But it was very much part of a continuum. It didn't stand alone. It wasn't its first part in our process. And the big thing is it can't be the last. And that's what we really need to talk about here is there's still so much. Most states are running somewhere around some 65, 70% of people with disabilities not in the workforce in any way. right? It's not only a moral failure of our states and our leadership in our country, it is an economic failure. So no matter how you come at this issue, it is a failure, one that needs to be addressed. Legislators want to do that, right? You want to be the ones to be like, I will help, or I will get something done that maybe hasn't been where it should be yet, right? Well, this is your opportunity now, in a year like now, to introduce bills like 1548 or even better versions, or perhaps taking the Maryland model and talk about maybe getting a secretary embedded in your cabinet, like they do in Maryland, to help prioritize these issues. Now is the year to introduce these things forward and to pick up that mantle. Some of us, like myself, will come in with a little bit of a personal tie, in the disability arena, that sometimes very much is the fuel, because we know certain challenges that come across. But that being said, you don't need to have it. You don't need to have it in order to be a champion of these causes. We need everybody, no matter whether or not you have a loved one or you yourself have a disability or not. At the end of the day, it's irrelevant. But we want to be sure that people with disabilities are always part of everything we do, right? Nothing for us without us, right? So that's always a process, but don't wait for that invite. So jump on in and help out. Believe me, the need is there, and it is a great cause for you to be involved in as we move our country forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Representative Miller. I wanted to give Senator Hoffman an opportunity to join the conversation. Senator Hoffman, as we know, Minnesota has been designated an employment first state in 2016, and you're well known for working in a bipartisan manner to further advance disability employment policy in the state. Could you share with us some examples of your work? Share some of the work you've done, along with the challenges and successes you've seen in actual implementation of those policies.
Well, Nadia, do you have a couple of hours of time where I could, go into depth on the challenges and stuff? I'm not.
How about the top three?
Top three. No, you know what? It comes back to, first of all, what an honor to be on here with Representative Miller and Secretary Beatty. When I joined the task force that we looked at the workforce work that we had done through CSG and SEED, it was just a couple of things stuck out for me. Number one, to find out that here was this state of Maryland that absolutely had somebody on the cabinet level that was helping agencies understand the role of disability when it comes to policy across the board. Hence the term intersectionality, right? That has to be a conversation that's in there. It just can't be a standalone piece. And so I'm just honored, Carol, to be on here with you, and Dan, for the things that you're doing and what you have done and continue to do is just absolutely beyond. So thank you for doing that. And Nadia, Christina, and Dina, thank you for letting me be part of this conversation. Here's the thing that gets me. Back in 2001, Congressman Jim Ramstad talked about health and human services and education being a nonpartisan, non-political conversation. As a matter of fact, he said to me at the time when I was appointed under U.S. Secretary of Education Rodney Page to the FICC, Federal Interagency Coordinating Council, he said, look, John, your ego's got to be left out in the hallway. Just remember that. When you come in here and have the conversation, you got to focus on what's important to the outcome that you're looking for. I never forgot that, Nadia. I never absolutely ever forgot that, and never will, and have absolutely said his name many times. And so fast forward, here I am in 2012, deciding to run for office, and the first door I knocked on, the person said to me, I don't care what your political background is. I don't care what your politics are. Will you just get something done? Hence, I started thinking, oh, wow, well, maybe there's some common sense that needs to be approached here, right? Looking at what Senator Dave Durenberger talks about, right? When he sees the fact that there can be work done, and the way he did work with Senator Tom Harkin back in 1988, 1989, they did that common sense bipartisan work because that's what was respected of them to do. That's what they were called to do, right? And U.S. Senator Dernberger talks about that. I was called to do that, right? It's leave the politics aside. So here's this sense of all these people that I looked up to, talking about you gotta set your egos aside and be able to do that, and look toward what it needs that you want, which is that outcome, right? So in education and health and human services. So I thought, well, why not run for this office and do it, and let's see what I can do. 91% of my bills are bipartisan, folks. I think it still can be done, even though when we turn on the news at night, all we see is bickering and finger pointing and brinkmanship and folks that say, well, you can't do this and you can't do that. But yet my best friend in the state of Minnesota Senate is State Senator Jim Abler, who's a Republican. I'm a Democrat. So what? That's how Jim starts off that conversation. So what? And if you look at how many bills that were introduced by my office this past biennium, 400 and something, 421, and Senator Abler was at like 480. The majority of that we did together, and it was specifically surrounding the work that we did in aging, long-term care, health and human services, and education. So when you look at that, collaboration matters, right? You talk about that, Nadia. You said that early on, that if you look at local policymakers, collaboration matters. So there's a theme here for us to be able to leverage the relationship skills that we have in order to set aside the politics of usual and move toward what's important, right? And so Minnesota did that in 2014, right? And Governor Dayton initiated an executive order calling upon state agencies to hire people with disabilities, right? Not just this 2.2%, 3%. He actually elevated that up, saying, let's get to 10%. Let's really do this, right? And Connect 700 was an executive order, which since then, Governor Walz reestablished that executive order, right? And you look at the 8 points that you talked about early on, Nadia, we hit those, but there's a but clause. There's this management of how that system works where there seems to be a lot of gaps and there's a lot of misunderstanding of what happens. Well, guess what? That's not a political conversation. That's a relationship conversation, and that's a management structure conversation, and that's where we're going on that one, right? So I'm gonna highlight back and saying that, as we state officials, state leaders, the agency folks look at it, we cannot get entrenched in our political finger pointing and our bickering when it comes to health and human services, specifically on these civil rights issues that we talk about, right? And I think it's important. First of all, happy birthday to the ADA. Happy birthday to the fact that Section 504 of the Rehab Act, which when you look at it, there's a little guy from Minnesota called Hubert Humphrey from Waverly, Minnesota, right? And back in 2001, as I walked on C Street into the Health and Human Services building, I stopped and I looked up on the wall, and here was this quote that it was embedded in me, and being dear friends with his grandson. The moral test of government, thanks Dan Millen for bringing that up, is that when government treats those in the dawn of life, right? Children, those are in the twilight of life, the elderly, and those that are most needy, right? And those that need our intervention in order to help be fully fulfilled in what it is, right? So if a little town of Waverly, Minnesota, of 300 people can get a person named Hubert H. Humphrey to be able to execute that kind of mentality and set his politics aside to do it, absolutely, I think all of us can do it. So I think when you talk about the bipartisan work, it's because that's what people in my district, not my district, but the district I serve, asked me to do. That's what the mentors that I had, Jim Ramstead, Jim Abler, Dave Dernberger, have all expressed. We can get beyond the politics of life and make sure that we're doing the right thing for people, period.
Thank you, Sarah Hoffman. We're going to take another quick break to hear from our audience. So let's
Hello? I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
I think her microphone.
Oh, Natty, I think you're. think we wanted to maybe include a little poll here of some of the policies that we've reviewed. Let's see, we'll read the question, and it's, which of the following same policies are of greatest interest to you? One option is the state or cabinet level positions, telework and reasonable accommodations, employment first legislation, fast track hiring, diversity and inclusion initiatives, or any other options that you have. And if you have any, suggestions, include those in our chat. I'll read the question again for our audience members. It's, which of the following state as the model employer or same policies are of greatest interest to you? We've got the state cabinet level positions, telework and reasonable accommodations, employment first legislation, fast track hiring or preference systems, diversity and inclusion initiatives, or another option. And if you have it, let us know. I think everybody's had a chance to chime in. And it looks like it's pretty well distributed. We've got telework and reasonable accommodations being the receiving the most votes, and also diversity and inclusion initiatives. So it's all, there's many options available. And I'll hand it over to Nadia from here. Oh, I think we're still having a hard time hearing you, Nadia. But I think she did have some questions for all the panelists. And as disability policy champions, all three of you have a wealth of experience in advancing STAIN policies and programs in your respective states. For someone who is interested in advancing STAIN policy, but new to the topic, where would you suggest they start? What recommendations or pearls of wisdom would you share with them? And I guess we would start with Senator Hoffman.
Thank you. That's a great question. You can never surround yourself with enough people that forget more in a day than you'll ever know, right? And I'll tell you, there's an absolute expert in the state of Minnesota, although she is humble beyond all means. Her name is Dr. Colleen Wick, and she's the one who started. Carol, you're shaking your head.
Yeah.
She is Partners in
Yeah.
Policy Making. And you'll ask her a simple question and she'll give you a 60-page dissertation. So you got to be careful when you ask somebody that's got that kind of knowledge base. But it's really surround yourself with people that are going to be able to help you execute where you want to go. Then number one on that is to find out who your allies are, the people that want to play in the same sandbox as you, and then find out those folks that might be missing some information and awareness about why it is that's important that you start something, right? And get people to think outside the box. Hence, I always say, stretch your network of allies, right? Ronald, I'm not going to quote him. What the heck, I'll do it anyway. When he said, 80% agreement with me doesn't make you a 20% an enemy. It makes you 80%. That makes you an ally, right? So find that 80% of the folks that can help you get through the process, because the process, it's not in a textbook. A lot of it happens really, really, really in the relationship side. So I would say get to know people.
Representative Miller, do you have something to contribute there?
Sure. And I hope we get Nadia. You're doing great filling in, but
Yeah.
I hope we get Nadia too. Look, one of the things I think that is great is, is reaching out to your community where you are. So one of the first things that we started in my office was talking with special education parents. And that kind of led and connected to a variety of dots. So in Pennsylvania, at least in my office, we always do a fair amount of local events, even like little round, table discussions that we would host, where we just get 4, 5, 6, 8 people in a room, and for an hour spitball problems and kind of get a better understanding of those challenges. So I think you can start, whether it's experts are fantastic, People living with a diagnosis every day, whether it be as a self-advocate or a parent perhaps of a child, they know what the challenges are. They know where the issues are. And if your elected office, depending on how it's all structured, allows you, if you have the capability and time to do those types of small discussions, whether it be at a coffee shop or in somebody's living room, I guarantee you that that is a great way for you to get that familiarity and that personal story as well as to what it all matters and means than by sitting down with people who are living it every day.
Secretary Beatty?
Yeah, hi. So I love the answers that we just had from the two elected officials here. I love the whole idea of relationship building, and even, as important as that kind of local kind of take on this. Thank you both for pointing out that Maryland, and applauding Maryland for taking this step of having a Department of Disabilities and a secretary who is an active member of the governor's cabinet and can build relationships over time. But I happen to know that that's not possible in most states, or it might be possible, and maybe that's something to work towards, but it hasn't happened yet. So I don't want people to be discouraged in that those kind of relationship building opportunities are there at all levels. And I've had the distinct honor and pleasure and privilege of working with Governor Hogan for the last 5.5 years, and thankfully he was reelected. And so, we can continue to build those partnerships. But what I found in our state, because I've worked in our state for my whole professional career, is that we're a state that really relies on relationships, and influencing happens during those kind of collegial collaboration partnerships. And I would leave it at this, that there's always somebody within your either state government or your legislature, or lots of, there could be even lots of people who have a unique interest in building opportunities or expanding opportunities for people in your state with disabilities. And so it's just really necessary to find those people and build those relationships. And I've talked to people across the country in the last few years, and sometimes sometimes it is a governor, sometimes it's a lieutenant governor, sometimes it's members of the legislature. It's really just important to kind of hone in on who has that interest. And a lot of times it's not, like in terms of state government, I have found that a lot of my strongest colleagues and strongest allies, and those that depend on our department the most, are the colleagues that are not necessarily familiar with disability as the agencies that are tasked with primarily serving people with disabilities. So I would say, kind of think outside of the usual suspects, as I call them.
Thank you, Secretary Beatty. Can you hear me now? Hello? Hello? Can you hear me? Can anyone hear me?
Okay, and I think we're still having some technical difficulties hearing Nadia's audio connection. Let's see if we wanted to move on to some of our current questions we received from the chat, perhaps. Let's see, and we have one that we received was, has there been a movement amongst states to standardize methodologies to measure persons with a disability? For example, the uniform adoption of the Washington Group's measurement tools. It seems that due to lack of uniformity as to how different agencies measure disability, the data related to disability often presents problematical. How are your states dealing with employing individuals with disabilities in the, oh wait, sorry, that's a different one. We'll start with the first one about uniform standard methodologies. I guess
I think
Representative
they could be.
Miller, if
I
you'd
think
like
they
to
could
go,
be.
or
Oh,
Hoffman.
sorry. No, no, no.
No, go
Go
ahead.
ahead, Dan.
No, no, Senator.
So I think those two could go together, right? I mean, that's the whole thing. We got this great idea, the task force. We got this huge thing, this global look at things. But when it comes down to the implementation of some of those things, there's lacks some consistency across the board. And what our office has found in conjunction with Senator Abler's office is that there is a lack of consistency. For example, and these are the things that we wanted to highlight regarding policies that we want to work on, right? And when you have an idea of an ADA, just an ADA coordinator, an ADA training program, right? There's a job descriptions don't match up, right? The one agency will have it this way, another agency will have it that way, having it that way, right? Hence, then you have a person who might have a part-time application on that, but there isn't this global knowledge of what is a reasonable accommodation. And I'll give you a really good example. One of our agencies had in the last year, and this is what we were working on pre-COVID. My God, it was like these things that we were really busting loose on pre-COVID. Bobby Silverstein was working with my staff on implementation, and some changes within our Connect 700 program, which is absolutely with an executive order, and it hits all those benchmarks Nadia put in place, but just the implementation and management of it needs some structural help. I'm not talking about a micromanaging part of it, but the fact is that there needs to be some piece, right? And so how the ADA coordinators are working with HR, management, diversity, equity staff to implement and support agencies, the overall support of people with disabilities, is absolutely inconsistent. So the question that comes up, that's how I read that question, Christina, is there a consistency? The answer is no, there isn't consistency. And how do you get that? Well, you go back to a point where there has to be a nice little umbrella where somebody sits underneath that umbrella and is able to help coordinate how those look. And I'm going to go back to the one story I started. One of our agencies had 599 reasonable accommodation requests, and they granted 598, right? They understand that. Minnesota has this separate fund in case there's this undue hardship or undue burden thing that people always notate, right? Most accommodations are denied because of those types of things within our state, right? And so when you look at one agency who's granting that because they completely have one person who understands what a reasonable accommodation is, and then you go across the line, you see another agency, which this agency I'm talking about, I'm not going to tell you who they are, but you could probably guess. They have a pretty good finger on Centers for Medicaid Services and the one-for-one match that the state has. They've had the highest amount of people that were denied reasonable accommodations. And let me give you one example. Can I do that, Christina? One of the IT people wanted to have a reasonable accommodation to be able to have her laptop sitting in the front row of a presentation, right? So that she could follow along with the presenter that's doing and have the worksheet in front of her on her laptop, right? Couple of things. There was a distraction of so many people in the room because of the fact that her unique and individualized needs, right? It's not this, it's a unique and individualized need, was I need to stay focused. I want to be in front. I want to have that. That would cost the state agency zip, right? They denied that reasonable accommodation because the comment back, and this is somebody who doesn't have consistency in understanding what a reasonable accommodation is saying that, well, other people are going to be jealous of the fact that you might be on Facebook. Honest to God, that's a true story. I'm not making this up. Kevin will attest to that. It's documented and I have emails on it. So I think there needs to be consistency.
All right, great. I think before we hear from Secretary Beatty, we wanted maybe Nadia, if you could maybe leave the Zoom meeting and come back in. I know we want to hear your voice and we want to participate with you in this important matter. But in the meantime, we'll hear from Secretary Beatty. Oh, I think you're on that
Yeah,
question.
I was looking for that little thing at the bottom that I could unmute. I really don't have anything really to add. I know this is a hard one. Actually, if I could go into the COVID response, we've actually used this pandemic as an opportunity to do some much broader based education around, what is disability, what are the laws around disability, including the ADA, of course. What are accommodations? And I can think of at least two things that, we are just consumed right now with the whole notion of, face covering and how difficult it is to really embed that notion culturally across the state, a state that's as diverse as ours. And, just this notion that accommodations doesn't mean, yes or no, but accommodations is an opportunity to engage in a conversation and to learn more about what's needed and figure out some strategies. So, I feel like what we've learned during this will be very helpful to us as we move forward, hopefully soon, into a more normal world.
Sure, I guess as we transition to talking about COVID and how it's an opportunity, Representative Miller, did you want to explain how that has been a factor in your state?
Sure. So, look, I appreciate the reference to the Washington group, I think it was, and there's no doubt that, if you don't agree on facts, you're unlikely to agree on solutions. And that applies in a variety of contexts. And that continues to be a struggle for us as we deal as a community, state, and nation with COVID. Pennsylvania has almost 13 million people and is incredibly diverse in those 13 million. So, look, I think the key thing about this is that there is no doubt that I think Nadia's comments in the beginning, I think, made reference that during such challenges, changes in a lot of ways speed up. Some of those changes are positive for many. Some of those changes can be negative. And in COVID, I think the key thing about it is that the disability lens must be applied in view of basically every policy decision. So yes, there are positives in the sense that more employers, I think, are becoming more comfortable with the idea of how to measure work quality and progress at home. And there has been no doubt a seismic shift in that being seen as an acceptable option, whereas even 6 months ago, those numbers would have clearly reflected a different reality. No doubt we have to continue to find tools in certain ways to measure those things, and there are changes on how we collaborate with each other on how to get projects done. There's no doubt we have to do that, right? So how do you do that effectively or even maybe even improved when you're doing it all virtually? Those are real questions, and employers, I think, of all types, public and private, are right to think about them. But the key thing about it is that it does provide some degree of opportunity for some people with disabilities who have been willing and able to work from home for a long time, but to which we're hitting sort of institutional sort of roadblocks as to what was deemed to be acceptable or not. So I do think that COVID has reshaped aspects of that. There are still other COVID issues that are not helpful, not only in relation to many of the typical population, but the atypical as well, especially in relation to some of the transportation concerns for those people who are still who are not working from home. And as public transportation systems to which some people rely on, or even if you're doing Uber and things for things, there's changes to availability that impact workflow, again, both typical and atypical, that COVID has brought about. So the key thing, I think, is that as economics, of course, and public health remain to be major lenses for us to view COVID through, what we cannot allow to happen is that the disability community is not part of every of that equation and that discussion. And all too often, unfortunately, our American story is one to which the disability community is something that is long an afterthought into many of these situations, especially in relation to a crisis. So I do think there's opportunity. There's no doubt there's going to continue to be things that we have champions like the good senator and the secretary and states that prioritize these things by making sure that we have these voices embedded not just in the activity of the advocate community, not just in the the personal stories at home, but also embedded in existing government structures to be sure that in those discussions, people with disabilities are part of every plan that a state, at the very least a state, does.
Great. I think we have Natty on the line. I believe she's called back in. Maybe not. Okay. I guess Senator Hoffman, did you have a chance to respond? I'm trying to catch back around here.
Yeah, I did. I think I started, but it's absolutely right. I mean, there's this what Maryland, and I'm going to go back to the Secretary Beatty with what Maryland has decided to do is an intentional and purposeful act to make sure that people with disabilities are not like the Ronnie James Dio song, the last in line. They are actually the first in line, right? Because when you're talking about transportation or you're talking about agriculture, you're talking about anything, if you don't intersectionally have that conversation about people with disabilities, we know you're missing out on one of every 4 people, one of every 5 people in your constituency. And so those are important, purposeful plan things to have, and that's why that's all I wanted to add to what Dan was saying.
Okay, I think we have Nadia back on. Oh, we're on mute right now, but oh, we're working on it. I think right now, as we briefly mentioned the. Oh, there she is.
It's a miracle. I've conquered the technology. Sorry for all the technical challenges. I use speech recognition software and a headset to navigate my computer, and as you can tell, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So thank you for your patience, and thank you for Christina for jumping in. I don't want to interrupt the conversation, so I'll let you continue where you've been. So.
I think we were just discussing the impact of COVID, and we finished up the first question from our chat. But I think that was one of my questions, was that, it was reported, the government job sector has lost a lot of jobs in the past since March due to COVID. And do you have any proposals or ways that you can help the states during this time to use same policies moving forward, or use this as an opportunity?
You know what I like in all this, Christina? Centers for Medicaid Services back in March 23rd or 24th to be exact. That's just how I think. I take a snapshot of a date. And they had said, look, if you need some instructions specifically around the 1915K, right? So you have this infrastructure of day training and habilitation programs or whatever home and community-based services you might as a state, right? Because we know with Medicaid, if you've seen one Medicaid plan in the state, you've seen one Medicaid plan in the state, right? And so back in March, they offered technical assistance to states to say, look, we know this is going to have an impact. Let's set these retainer. Let's do some retainer. We've never done this. Let's see what we can do in order to help that. Because how is it sets the employment first in Minnesota is a lot of the folks that were traditionally going to day programs, we're transitioning them into that independence, the level of independence, the vision of independence that Senator Abler and I absolutely had a bill This year it was Senate File 3923, which then was rolled into and became law on the first special session. But it's really talking about people, that first doorway should be about a vision of independence, not just talking about it, but make sure that the actual agencies are doing it, right? But in this time of COVID, money wasn't being delivered to those infrastructure programs, and hence what you saw was their fixed rates dropping down. What was cool is Centers for Medicaid Services absolutely said, we don't want to lose that impact because that will have a systemic approach regardless of where you're at on an advocacy side, right? We just yesterday passed with a bipartisan support, 67-0 in the Senate and 129-1 in the House, a bill that would give CARES Act money to those infrastructure programs, right? Not going after the federal match, which that's the whole different issue. The states should have been asking Centers for Medicaid Service and Technical Assistance, but at least we have some relationships and partnerships that were created on the federal and state level. And the state of Washington absolutely showed how to do it. Even the District of Columbia was doing it, but there is, 36 other states, including the District of Columbia, sought out that help and technical assistance. So people, once they're aware of it, want to help do that. And because if you don't have that infrastructure in place that's there, hence the workers, the folks that are saying we want to get rid of our 14C certificate, let's get rid of it. We know we need to get away from special minimum wage and start looking at a paycheck as a paycheck as a paycheck, right? You got a system that's been around for 60, 70 years, and you want to get that transition in place and do it, and you need some support and help in it. And that's one way that they were doing it. And so outside of that, there was some state initiatives that we did, which again passed yesterday. But I think that's out of this, Centers for Medicaid Services has absolutely been providing technical assistance to states, and I'm really honored to see that happen.
Okay, Nadia, I think if you wanted to give us your comments on COVID and the response and how we can respond and take it from there. Oh, but you're on mute. I'm sorry.
From ODEP's perspective, we really see COVID as an opportunity for states to again think about accommodations and being able to adapt in light of all the recent changes we've had around the workplace. Clearly, 2020 is going to be remembered for a lot of things, but on the positive side, we're reminded that this year is the 30th anniversary of the ADA, and ODEP recognizes that it's a difficult time for many businesses and workers. However, we also feel more than ever that it's important to honor the 30th anniversary because capitalizing on the talents of all segments of the population, including those of us with disabilities, will be essential to America's economic recovery and growth. So throughout 2020, I encourage all of you to continue to observe and celebrate the theme of the ADA and of ending this year, increasing access and opportunity, and advance state as model employer policies and programs in your state. Thank you to the panelists and to our partners at CSG for hosting this webinar. And I'll hand it over to you, Christina, again to wrap up today's event.
Sure. Thank you, Nadia Mossberg, Secretary Beatty, Senator Hoffman, and Representative Miller for your time to explore how to move states forward toward being a model employer and sharing your insights and your investment of time that has provided policymakers and leaders in this field with great ideas to take home to their states. If you have any questions or like further information, please contact us and use our website policy curriculum at seed.csg.org. And we'd love to have you all join us for the rest of our ADA celebration, the legacy of the ADA series. We have 4 more remaining throughout the end of the year. The next webinar is Getting Ready for Work, Youth Transitions and Guideposts for Success. Webinar 4 is the Stay at Work, Return to Work. The next one is Accessible Transportation and Workplace Technology. And the last one is Ensuring a Disability Perspective in State Policy. And the next two, you can receive you'll be eligible for CRC credits or Certificate of Completion. Thank you again for attending. And if you have any questions or concerns, or if you're interested in receiving state technical assistance from CSG and the SEED team, please contact myself or Dina Klimkina. Thank you.